Beneath the brooding skies of Braun Fell, the Dewle family grapples with a dark inheritance, and John, a boyhood friend, is urgently summoned to help them navigate their dilemma. A lust for wealth consumes beautiful Jonquil, driving her to urge the use of questionable methods, while her husband, who would do anything to please her, is wary about such a path. So what will John advise? Join me as we unravel this tale of greed, forbidden knowledge, and the shadows that linger in the human heart. I am Tony Walker, narrator of the Classic Ghost Stories podcast, and this week's story is The Withered Heart by G.G. Pendarves.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
The Withered Heart by G.G. Pendarves. Dear John, if a 15 years friendship means anything to you, come at once. Sorry to hustle you like this, good old slow worm that you are, but we've simply got to go into session about this thing before the month's out. The Ides of March are on Tuesday next, May 31st this year. My whole future is at stake, and you've got to come and help. It's a very queer thing, and Jonquil and I don't agree at all about it. I wish to heaven we'd found the box earlier and had more time to argue it all out. I see Jonquil's point of view, of course, and feel in a way bound to carry on for her sake. But, well, you know my views about playing around with anything like magic and necromancy. Jonquil says I'm morbid, still. Oh well, come and see us through it. Rafe, May 27th, 1938. I tried to pretend to myself that I couldn't go, that I wouldn't go. But even as I made these protestations inwardly, I was giving instructions to the boy Joe, who daily and conscientiously thwarts my best efforts to grow flowers, fruit, and vegetables. For a quarter of an hour or so, my foredoomed struggle went on. And Joe, that gallon of weed killer is for the whole lawn. Don't pour it over one dandelion root. It's merely one of his latest ideas. He gets them like measles. I won't be fooled into rushing off and leaving my garden just now. Joe, if you let that dog bury his bones in the new seedling bed, I'll kill you when I get back and bury you with them. All rubbish about his future. Another few weeks would make all the difference here. Why next Tuesday? Don't forget the quassia for the gooseberries, Joe. Now, what the devil has magic to do with his future? No, I won't go. I won't waste... By this time I was in the potting shed, kicking off my heavy shoes and scrambling hastily into another and cleaner pair. Like iron to a magnet, I was drawn to the house where my mind continued to carry on acrimonious debates, while my body intelligently took no notice of my mental disturbance and obeyed my will. I packed a bag, interviewed my old housekeeper, who expressed her disapproval of my plans by serving up watery coffee and an India rubber omelette for my lunch, and set off within the hour with parting instructions to expect me back in God's good time. It would have been more fitting to have said, in the devil's own time. So far, however, no tinge of the saturnine malice which had, after a lapse of 2 centuries, begun to manifest itself, darkened the joyful anticipation of seeing my friend Rafe Dewle. I clambered into my old Austin 12 and set her battered bonnet northwards. Those last hours on the open road, when life was still free and untainted, never again shall I experience anything like them. Knowledge has crippled imagination since then. Evil polluted every spring of happiness. On Shap Fells I stopped to cool my engine. Around me yellow gorse breathed out its honey perfume. Bumblebees fussed to and fro as I lay stretched out on the heath and watched white cloud feathers drift in the blue above. I slept for a brief spell on the warm-breathing earth with the thin, lonely call of curlews in my ears and the sense of hoary guardian hills all about me. In sleep, the first faint brush of evil touched me. I dreamed that I journeyed on on into a dark valley where, amidst mist and darkness and confusion, I felt the approach of invisible and threatening hosts. Yet I must go swiftly, go on swiftly. Someone was waiting, someone was in danger. I must hurry, hurry, hurry. I woke to find my sunlit hemisphere all dark and angry. The great hills reared up threateningly into thunderous cloud banks. Gusts of wind scattered the golden gorse bloom and whistled the coming storm along over shivering grass and heather. With a sense of urgent fear left by my dream, I started my car and dropped by long winding loops of road down to the valley, and as I tore along leafy green lanes towards Keswick, this fear persisted. Once past the town, I drove even more quickly, cutting across the head of Borrowdale under dark Helvellyn's shadow and along the unfrequented road which led to Braun Fell. The rambling old manor house lay some 12 miles from town. I'd known it well when Rafe and I were boys together. His people had been wealthy landowners before 1914. The war took their men. The lean following years took their money and lands. Braun Fell was on its last legs financially, and I wondered why Rafe hadn't sold up before his marriage. I couldn't reconcile what little I knew of Jonquil French with the austere bare life that Rafe's inheritance offered. Their meeting and the marriage that so swiftly followed had been romantic and impassioned, a sort of Lochinvar affair, for Rafe had snatched her from another and very wealthy suitor almost at the church doors. So characteristic of him and that hot Magyar blood of his. Even the lovely spoiled Jonquil French had succumbed to it. But for how long? His letter indicated the thin end of a wedge to my mind. I had met his bride in London and had not particularly liked her. Not the wife for Rafe at all. I'd no idea what was the mysterious thing the pair disagreed about, of course, and wished he'd been more explicit. Planning a good sensational story for me, no doubt. He loved being melodramatic. At last I could see the bulk of Braun Fell ahead, grey in shafts of pale clear light piercing a curtain of rain. About it, wide untended meadows stretched. Behind the bare face of the fell, where only stumps remained of the great fir forest that had been so beautiful a background to the ancient house. War victims, those lovely sheltering trees. And no plantations showed their young green promise for the future. How gaunt Braun Fell appeared. Not only that, it was positively sinister. I tried in vain to put the thought away. There was a look of boding grimness hanging over the massive pile that even neglected lands and bare scarred hillsides could not wholly explain. My old car splashed along the last mile of muddy lane between high ragged hedges. The road turned and twisted like a sea serpent. Preoccupied and depressed, I took a sharp angle and put on my brakes with a curse. A tall and very agile figure seemed to leap from right under the Austin's bonnet. "Rafe, what the deuce?" "Hello, hello, you old mud turtle. I forgive you, don't apologise." He opened the car door, slid his long legs under the dashboard, put an arm about my shoulders and grinned in the old familiar way. "You're a marvel, John. I didn't really count on you coming up till tomorrow, but I got so restless thinking you might turn up that I've been hanging round for the last hour here. Never been so glad to see your solemn old mug in my life." My heart grew light at the sight and sound of him. Marriage had not altered him as far as his friendship and affection were concerned. They were mine still, perfectly unchanged, the warmest, strongest tie I had in the world. I grunted and glowered up at his face, dark as a gypsy's, lighted up with the inner fire that burned so strongly in him. I never knew man, woman, or child with so glowing, so intense a quality. "Same old Mad March hair," I grumbled. "I'd hoped marriage might have given you a grain or two of sense. I suppose you realise you practically ruined my garden for the next 6 months by dragging me up here." "Splendid! I have made a hero of you." He burst out into a wild, barbaric song and yelled and yodeled until I drowned him with my car's horn. The noise was insane. We broke down and laughed like hyenas at last, and I drove on feeling younger than I'd ever expected to feel again. My 28 years had weighed heavily since Rafe's marriage. Saturday, May 28th. Once under the steep gabled roofs of Braun Fell, my bubble of delight was pricked. The sight of Jonquil Dewle, I should say, brought back the formless fear of my queer dream on Shap Fell. Why the sight of a girl like a princess in a fairy tale should depress a man, I didn't know. Jealousy? No, neither of Rafe nor of his exquisite bride. I had been jealous, afraid she'd come between us. I knew now most emphatically that she had not. Nor did I envy him. A woman has never yet roused the passionate thrill of joy I feel at sight of a perfect flower. It's no use arguing with me. I can't help it. That's the way I'm made. Mr. Fowler, John, I mean, how perfect that you've come. What a relief. You simply can't imagine what a time I've had lately. How lovely and large and shy you look. Isn't he too perfect, Rafe? Certainly not. I refuse to live with two perfect beings. John's a mere man like myself. She blew him a kiss, pirouetted round the dark-panelled room like a little red flame blown on the wind, dropped on one knee before me and raised her hands in an attitude of prayer. Dear, dear John, you are perfect. Oh, if only you could see yourself, just like a lovely solemn pine tree planted in the middle of our library. Please, may I kiss you? I really must. In a flash, she was on her light dancing feet, her arms about me, her pleading face upraised. I bent a stiff, reluctant head, received a moth-like touch on my lips, and watched her and Rafe clasp each other in ecstatic amusement. I take it back, darling, Rafe wiped his eyes. He certainly is perfect. Well, now you've settled that, perhaps you'll start explaining things. You haven't brought me here to point out the singular beauty of my character. No, chuckled Jonquil, but you wouldn't be of any use to us unless you were such a perfect, wise old owl. Her smile glanced like the sun on running water. Not time to explain before dinner. It's a long, sad tale. Rafe will take you up to your nice, large, draughty room, and when you hear a sound like a bull being massacred, come down for dinner. Rafe's invented a patent bugle thing he uses when I'm late for meals. He's too lazy to walk the half-mile upstairs. Left to myself in a bedroom whose size and dignity made me feel something like a small, dry ham sandwich on a platter designed for the traditional boar's head, I pushed open a diamond-paned lattice window, slumped down on the broad uncushioned seat beneath it, and glared out at the cobbled garth below. Pigeons kept up a low bubbling complaint from roofs of stables and outbuildings. Ruinous affairs, minus doors and windows, their slates and stones stained with centuries of rain, their woodwork grey and cracked, weeds, moss and lichen, a green-gold signal of defeat. It wasn't the garth or the many evidences of poverty elsewhere that worried me, however, as I sat listening to the broo, broo, broo of the pigeons. It was the thought of Jonquil. It was impossible to do more than put into mere words her remarkable beauty, and what are words when it comes to a young, living, exquisitely made creature like her? She had crisp red-gold curls, eyes of changing deep warm brown that reminded me of wallflowers in sunlight, a milk-white skin, and body so light and quick in movement, so sure in poise, so extraordinarily expressive of her every mood that she seemed winged, a brilliant tropic bird darting and flashing to and fro. But it was the will behind her laughing eyes that frightened me, her will, blind, ignorant, unyielding, a terrible weapon in her reckless hands. Abruptly my dream possessed me again. I was hurrying along that dark valley into mists and darkness and confusion. Someone needed my help. I must hurry, hurry, hurry. And now Jonquil was beside me, her hand on my arm, her voice laughing, persuading, telling me to come back. Come back, come back. She hindered me. I could not shake off her detaining hand. Her clear laugh prevented my hearing what my ears were straining for. I only knew I must hurry, hurry, hurry. In the gathering darkness ahead, someone needed me. It wasn't until after leaving the dinner table, graced no longer by Queen Anne's silver and Waterford glass, that I realised the significance of Jonquil's inclusion in my disturbing and recurring dream. Rain and wind turned the May night to chill discomfort. Rafe lighted the big library fire, piled up fir cones and logs until a heartening blaze warmed a respectable area of the lofty room with its mouldering books, threadbare rugs, and worm-eaten oak. Stimulated by tobacco, whiskey, and Rafe's company, I began to discount my boding fears again. But not for long. Jonquil was as eager as Rafe seemed reluctant to enlighten me. He yielded to her importunity at last, lifted down an iron casket from a high bookshelf, and set it on a heavy table near the fire. "There you are, lady and gentlemen," he made an exaggerated showman's gesture. "This is the luck of Braun Fell, and guaranteed to supply your heart's desire. To make its magic work, you need a nice round full moon, a strong belief in ghosts and devils, and a bottle of my best whiskey inside you. These will qualify you to commune with a benevolent gent who died 200 years ago in the hope of an extraordinary resurrection from the dead. His nonsense wasn't well received. The sight of that 12 by 8-inch bock filled me with a nasty crawling sensation of horror. I sat down my glass and stared at it in silence. Jonquil ran up to the table, tried to pull the box from beneath Rafe's long brown fingers. It's not fair to tell him like that. You're trying to prejudice him. Let me show him. Let me tell him." Instantly, he became the bland, infuriating nurse with a spoiled child, patted her shining, coppery curls with one hand, and imprisoned her impatient fingers with his other. Now. Remember, there's a little visitor here, darling. Don't forget your pretty manners." He kissed and put her back in a chair with another admonitory pat on the head. "This is my ancestor, my benevolent gent, hereafter known as BG, and I will not be intimidated by a woman with red hair." I knew Rafe well. He was stalling now. It was a very old habit of his to approach anything he deeply disliked with idiotic badinage. Well, he might deceive Jonquil, but not me. So I sat tight and waited. My hands and feet grew cold in spite of the hot, cheerful fire. I was most acutely awake, my eyes on Rafe's face, when that cursed dream of mine recurred. A dark, long valley stretched between us. He faded, dissolved into distance and smoky, dark confusion. "John, what is it?" I found myself on my feet, blinking stupidly down into Jonquil's alarmed face. Rafe was staring at me across the table, his mouth open in surprise. "A cramp?" he inquired. "It must have been a bad twinge. I never heard you yell like that before." "A cramp?" I echoed feebly, then pulled myself together. "No, it's a tooth. Going to have it out." I mumbled apologies, filled my glass, drank, and felt considerably better. My mind cleared. Let's get down to business." I waved my pipe toward the box on the table. "I want to know where I come in. Let's have the story straight, mind. John, you are such a darling. When you look at me like that through those enormous specs, I feel just like a criminal before a judge." Jonquil sat very stiffly and raised a hand as if to take an oath. "I promise not to interrupt, unless I have to." She tucked her little green slippers under her, curled up in the corner of a settee, and assumed an air of childlike, innocent patience. I watched her with a pang. She was so sure of herself. She knew so exactly what she wanted, and intended to get it at all costs. "Well?" My voice was brusque with anxiety as I turned to Rafe. "Bring out the skeleton in the cupboard." His lips twisted in a rather doubtful smile. "Queer you should say that. It's not exactly a skeleton, but it is part of a dead body." "What? Your ancestor, did you say? Was he embalmed?" "His heart was." He lifted the casket's heavy lid as he spoke. A breath of thin, cold air blew across my face and neck as I leaned forward to watch. I hated to see him standing over that beastly box. There was something so repulsive and ominous about it that my flesh crept when his fingers touched its rusty lid. Intuition told me that he did more than open a lid. He opened a door to something deadlier than plague. It was a relief to my taut nerves to see him take out two tangible objects and set them on the table. One was a fat little book, fastened with broad brass clasps and bound in solid leather. The other, I got to my feet and went to examine it more closely. My gorge rose at the sight of the dark, dried thing. I've seen mummies, in some way hideous enough. I've prowled about laboratories and examined scientific specimens preserved in fluids, and many were fairly revolting to a mind and imagination like mine. But this little horror, black and withered, with a strange metallic sheen. In amazement, I drew still closer, unable to credit my sight. Then I straightened up with a jerk and glanced at Rafe. "It's living. It beats. The thing beats." He nodded. "Since 1738, according to his tombstone date." I saw he shared my revulsion. I forced myself to touch the heart and drew back in horror at finding the dark, withered bit of muscle was warm. Jonquil clapped her hands. You see, now perhaps you'll persuade Rafe to do it. Oh, he must. She could contain herself no longer and flashed across to us. There wasn't a vestige of fear in her eager face as she put out a delicate, exploring hand and touched the withered heart. Her faith in it, her strong will to test it, lent the dreadful thing power, and I saw it swell under her fingers, saw the throbbing pulse beat stronger, fuller. "No, don't!" Rafe's voice sharply admonished her. His hand snatched back her own. She looked from him to me and laughed, but the red-brown eyes were bright with impatient anger. "How exasperating men are! You look like two old hens with a duckling. I didn't think you'd be afraid too, John." She gave me a stormy, scornful glance. Next moment she was curled up in her corner again, sudden as a puff of wind. "John, darling," her voice was honey-sweet now, "that's a heart of gold, quite literally a heart of gold for Rafe and me. If he chooses. Oh, I see what you're thinking. You're a sentimentalist like Rafe. I'm not. His heart won't reduce the bank's overdraft, you know. That," she flicked an airy hand toward the table, "that heart will." I caught Rafe's glance at her and sharply realized his carefully concealed unhappiness. His shining tower of romance was fast changing to an old house in need of repair. The solitary countryside where he and she would walk in dreams was being reduced to an estate whose every hedge and gate and meadow clamoured for money, money, money. I'd never felt the pinch of my own straitened circumstances before, but now I hated myself. I'd have given anything to put things right for Rafe, and I hated Jonquil too, unreasonably, fiercely, for making him unhappy. I didn't answer her. I was watching Rafe as, with swift, distasteful touch, he took up the repulsive little heart, restored it to its metal box, and dropped the lid with a clang. Then he picked up the squat leather book, and I followed him to the fireside. I was convinced he was as much relieved as I to have that beastly heart out of sight. "Don't tremble in your shoes, old man. I'm not going to read this tome right through. It's full of queer stories and experiments that don't concern our problem directly. This is the really juicy bit that does." He drew a stiff, yellowed, crackling sheet from a pocket of the book's cover and unfolded it with a flourish. "This is the apple of discord in the house of Dewle. This is the bee in Jonquil's bonnet. This is what's muting the family loot. A scrap of paper. A thing capable of starting anything in the world. Wars, duels, murders, all the trouble it is or ever will be. A cheque for £1 million is a scrap of paper I'd love to see, with your name on it, dearest." "It was only 100,000 this morning," he reminded her. "Even the BG has limits, you must remember." "And those that don't ask don't get," she retorted with a flirt of her red curls. "Well, we'll see what John thinks of my ancestor, Count Dewle's billet doux." He gave me a swift glance. "There's a preliminary, but I'll spare you about his grave. It's been lost for generations, but Jonquil discovered it after reading this." I could see the black, thick lettering through the semi-transparent paper as Rafe held it up. He seemed to know it pretty well by heart, to judge by the way he galloped through the closely written lines. "This document concerns only those in whose veins my blood doth run, and who bear the ancient name of Dewle. Let any such read these words with faith to believe and courage to obey, and to them will I grant the wish that lies most closely to their heart, be it for life beyond mortal span, for riches, for fame, or for the sweet delights of love. Let him who would seek my aid ask in the full knowledge that I, Count Dewle, have power to give him his desire. For his part, he must strictly observe such instructions as are writ hereafter, failing not in any particular. Let him take careful heed, therefore, to obey. The deed must be done upon a certain night, and that the first night of a month of June, when the month is at the full between its second and third quarters. I must be summoned by one who stands beside my grave, and in such words as are graven upon the inner side of the box in which this document shall be discovered, together with the book in my heart. At the first line of the conjuration, my kinsman shall light a flame, and it shall be of oil poured out into a black bowl and set at the foot of the grave. At the second line, he shall sprinkle earth upon the grave, and it shall be earth which fire has made bitter, and rain has washed, and the four winds blown upon. At the third line, he shall set my heart at the head of the grave. Then, kneeling beside it, he shall cut his left hand until his blood drops from it upon the heart. Lastly, he shall summon me in a loud voice and pronounce his wish, and I shall hear him. And I will come to him, and whatsoever boon he asks, it shall be his. Rafe stopped reading as abruptly as he'd begun and held out the paper. You can read the conjuration for yourself. It's a bit melodramatic. Did the claim aloud just now? I read in silence, then sat staring into the fire. The touch of the paper, its crabbed evil lettering, and the hateful words themselves filled me with loathing. Well, Rafe continued, how's that for an ancestor? Jonquil's convinced that if I do my little song and dance, he'll come rushing back from, this book leaves no doubt from where, with a present for a good boy under his ghostly arm. Yes, I'm convinced he would. Oh, John, you dear, you absolute darling, cried Jonquil. You do think there's something in it. You truly and really do. Oh, I'm thrilled. Rafe's been so exasperating about it. Now he'll simply have to give in. I didn't say that I agreed with you, I interrupted. She sat up with a jerk, scattering cigarette ash over the satin iridescence of her dress. Black, cold rage possessed me, brain and body. I knew I'd never make her understand. Spoiled, lovely little materialist that she was. Superstition urged her to snatch at this promised wealth. Ignorance blinded her to the hideous risk. You don't agree with me? You've just said you believed the Count could and would return. Yes, I believe that. Well? Her face grew radiant again. Then you're just teasing. You are on my side after all. No, once and for all, I'm utterly against you. The man that wrote that promise and left behind that foul thing, I pointed to the box on the table, must have been the devil's own brother. Oh, wailed Jonquil, you're not going to talk about demons and dangers and unholy powers too? Rafe's been croaking like a raven for 3 whole days, and now you. Go to it, old man, urged Rafe. She won't take it from me, but perhaps you can make her see it's not just money for jam. I knew I couldn't move her, but I tried, explained, reasoned, argued, all to no purpose. It's no use trying to frighten me. You believe Count Dewle can be brought back, she repeated for the 20th time, and that he could make Rafe a rich man. That's enough for me. He's only a ghost, poor thing. Perhaps he was just a harmless, eccentric old man, wouldn't make a will, wanted to give it himself to his descendants. Harmless? What about that heart of his? Beating 200 years after his death. Do you think unaided human knowledge would leave that behind? Count Dewle will surely return, if the door is open to him. But it's forbidden. The dead may not, must not return. Can't see why not. You don't actually know any more than I do myself. You've read a lot of stuffy books and believe everything in them. I haven't. I'm unprejudiced. I'm willing to take risks. You mean to let Rafe take them? Rafe, who'd sat listening with a queer twisted smile, laughed out at this. Hear, hear, exactly. Is she to do a pantomime scene at midnight by the grave of a disreputable old nobleman? No. Is she to chat with a 200-year-old devil worshipper in the moonlight? No. Is she asked to shed her good red blood on a thing that looks like a bit of cat's meat? No. Well, Rafe, darling, it probably is all nonsense, and I'm tired of arguing about it. Still, she jumped up from the settee and stood before the fire facing the two of us. John has helped me after all. She dropped me a mocking curtsy. Yes, you dear old Solomon. You've helped me enormously. Now I feel absolutely certain there is something in it, or you wouldn't be so worried. You know, darling, she turned to Rafe, you promised to be guided by John's opinion. He's given it. He completely believes in your ancestor, and so do I. Now, I'll never forgive you if you don't take a chance to try this thing out. Jonquil! I was on my feet now, almost incoherent with fury. What I believe in is the risk, the damnable risk of trying such a thing. You only believe in the money you want and shut your eyes to anything else. Do you suppose for a moment that dead thing has waited 2 centuries to give you a fortune? She burst out laughing. John, if you could only see yourself. You look like one of the minor prophets in action. There's a picture in the National Gallery that exactly... Rafe! I was almost shouting now. You know enough, if she doesn't, to realise the wicked insanity of doing such a thing. Do you remember Harland and the sticky end he came to? And Browning, who's gibbering away in an asylum? They happen to be men we know personally. But think of the hundreds of others who've been fools enough to think necromancy is a mere parlour game, who've deliberately walked into hell. It's hushed up. Such cases always are. People are called mad or reputed dead of heart attacks, etc. The truth is too beastly to publish. There's a good deal in what you say. Rafe had assumed a poise of amused detachment now. I've not delved into occult lore as you have, old man. I dislike what I know, however. Still, Jonquil's attitude of nothing venture, nothing win has a lot to recommend it. She flew to him, took his hand in both her own. Oh, I knew you'd be an angel. You really mean to try it out? His answering look at her eager, lovely face, his gesture as he rumpled her flaming aureole of hair was sufficient for me. She'd won. My hot, angry opposition had decided him and pushed him into doing so, and I cursed myself for a pompous, muddle-headed fool. I'd tilted the balance down to hell. If I'd kept calm and laughed at Count Dewle, made light of the whole affair, Jonquil's belief might have faded. I lost my temper with her, lost my best chance by forcing Rafe to take her part. My dream enveloped me in its swirling vapour. I was driving furiously down that long, desolate valley. In the cloudy, smothering darkness I heard a voice, Count Dewle, Count Dewle, Count Dewle. The piercing cry was echoed by howls of laughter from the swirling mists. I drove on. Someone needed me. Someone I loved needed me. Sunday, May 29th. I spent a night of wretched anger and self-reproach and misery, interspersed with lapses into the haunting terror of my dream. Rafe found me at 8 a.m., empty pipe between my teeth, sitting on the stone parapet of a bridge, my thoughts dark and cold as the water I watched so gloomily. Not worth the usual penny, I can see. Rafe came to perch beside me. Still, there's some excuse for you, enough to make anyone broody. My estate reminds me of the hymn, change and decay in all around I see. He patted me on the back. Cheer up, Jacko! And don't worry about the way things have turned out, this way or another, what odds. I'm tremendously bucked up to have you here, and I'm bent on enjoying myself where I can. Forget Tuesday night, forget it. After all, you never know. His voice, his look, his friendly touch cheered me. After all, as he said, one never did know. It was a relief to let myself be bluffed by his absurdly high spirits. Depression slipped off like a wet cloak as we tramped home for breakfast, as carefree as if the pair of us had nothing more on our minds than a boat race or a thesis to be finished. Jonquil appeared in high feather at the breakfast table, adorable with Rafe, mockingly sweet with me, and of course she scarcely talked of anything but Count Dewle, how and when and where and what was going to happen about the wealth with which the family fortune was to be restored. Rafe refused to be serious even for a moment about the BG, as he called the Count. He was in the unreasoning fey mood that always seized him before any special test in our college days. "I think the date's a mistake," he remarked. "The old boy meant April the 1st. I didn't remind him that the last night of May this year was peculiarly fitted for Count Dewle's return. He knew considerably more than he acknowledged of ceremonial magic. It was unlikely that the significance of next Tuesday's date had escaped him. Together, as students, we'd read the 4th book of the Philosophia Occulta and the works of Pyrrhus de Mirandola and the Grimoire of Pope Honorius. Above all, he'd read the book which Count Dewle had left behind him. I'd borrowed and read it too from cover to cover, and it was plain that Rafe's ancestor had, after many experimental essays, followed the teachings and practices of the infamous Lord of Coras. These entailed observance of astronomy, and according to them, such a purpose as the return of the dead could only be accomplished at certain rare conjunctions of the stars and moon and planets. Rafe must be aware of these facts. Perhaps, Jonquil's face sparkled with excitement, perhaps it will be priceless old jewellery he brought from Hungary. Count Dewle was the first of your family to settle in England, wasn't he, Rafe? He came because he was pushed, he replied. They'd found he'd smuggled emeralds mined in the high Tatra Alps. He escaped from a particularly spectacular death connected with rope and 4 horses by a miracle, and, tradition records, by the aid of the devils he served. "Emeralds," breathed Jonquil, her eyes 2 deep pools of ecstasy. "How I adore emeralds. I shall keep the most beautiful for myself, Rafe. You can sell the rest if I have just one perfect stone to wear." "Certainly, madam." He whipped out a notebook and pencil and assumed a businesslike air. "Let me see now. What size and colour does madame prefer? I wouldn't like to order something unsuitable. Oval, round, or square? Green or rose red?" "Rose red." She took him up promptly. "A very, very large square-cut stone, set as a pendant with diamonds." He licked his pencil and printed her order laboriously. "You can take off that superior smirk, my child," he assured her. "There are such things as rose-red emeralds." Their discussion went on to the end of the meal. Then she announced that we were all going to climb Horse Fell. "I found a black bowl for the oil. All we need now is the earth." "Earth? Climb up 500 feet on a good Sabbath day of rest? Your breakfast has flown to your head, child. Think again. What about my untilled acres?" "Doesn't it say that the earth must be bitter with fire and washed with rain and blown on by the 4 winds? Very well, then. Wasn't there a heath fire on Horsefell last month? It's as black as soot now and soaked in rain, and every wind in the world blows up there." She'd made up her mind. It was going to be earth from Horsefell, and the remainder of the day was spent in getting it. Tuesday night, May 31st. Tuesday morning, afternoon, night. At last, Tuesday night. Rafe and I stood waiting for Jonquil in the library. It was after 11 p.m. In a few minutes we should set out across the fields to where Count Dewle's grave lay. From the book he'd left, it was clear that in England, as in his own native country, the Count had been excommunicated by the Church, and his body buried therefore in unconsecrated ground. It was Jonquil's indefatigable curiosity that had discovered the grave with its broken headstone in one of Rafe's outlying meadows. It was this initial discovery that had at first determined her to carry out the remainder of the book's instructions. "Who actually found the metal box?" I asked now. The constraint between Rafe and myself on this last day had made me desperate. He'd steadily avoided being alone with me until now, although I'd persistently sought such an opportunity, for today Jonquil had, for the first time, weakened in her project. Too obstinately proud to say outright she was afraid, she'd endeavoured in roundabout ways to get Rafe to change his mind. He'd refused to rise to her bait, brushed aside her every tentative move toward cancelling the date he'd determined to keep with his BG. But her wavering had given me a gleam of hope. Perhaps I might persuade him out of this insanely dangerous rendezvous even now. I felt sure Jonquil had given me this last chance to do so. "Was it you who found the box?" I repeated. He gave me a queer, slanting look, half speculative, half sad. "It found me," he laughed. "It slipped from the top of a bookshelf. I haven't the slightest recollection of seeing it in the house before. Never heard my father mention it. Must have been pushed out of sight somehow. It fell with a crash right at my feet, and the book and the BG's heart rolled onto the floor. Rafe, don't go on with this. Even Jonquil doesn't want it now. You surely know the risk. Why will you—" He caught my eye and changed colour. I saw he was trying to bring himself to answer me and waited. He began to speak in quick, almost stammering words. "Yes, I know the risk. I know, old man. But I must go on now. It's been heaven these last 6 months with Jonquil. Heaven. But it can't last. We married in haste, but I'm damned if I'll let her repent at leisure. It's 1,000,000 to 1 I'll come through, with money or without it tonight, but she'll remember I've tried." "Rafe, you can't. You won't." "I will. It's easier to die than to lose her. I can face any hell but that. But she's going to lose you, and she's afraid of that now. She'd be glad, thankful, if you gave up." He smiled as he'd smiled 1,000 times when I'd missed some obvious point. "Dear old chap, you don't know Jonquil. She's temperamental, just working up to the proper gooseflesh mood for tonight's orgy. No use, John. I'd never live it down if I failed her now. She's a child, an adorable child. I've had more than most men, and I'm choosing the easiest way out." Jonquil's light step sounded on the uncarpeted old stairway. "Ready?" As shining curls appeared round the door. "It's after 11 o'clock. We ought to start." We went out to the great echoing hall. Our feet on the old-fashioned red tiles clanked dismally. "This is the picnic basket." Rafe took up Count Dewle's box from an oak chest. "Got the champagne and oysters, dear? Right, let's start." The night was cool, almost cold. Wind stirred in the treetops. Tall, solemn elms on either side of the avenue whispered uneasily as we passed between their double ranks. Overhead, a brilliant sky of stars and a proud moon sailing in full majesty. I wondered if any remote world up there was like the one I trod, if other beings knew such bitterness and horror and evil as we did on our earth. I wondered if I could go on living here alone when Rafe... Suddenly, my dream blotted out moon, stars and earth. I had reached the end of that awful valley, breathless, spent from long pursuit. Before me, a broken pathway descended to the lip of a yawning chasm. And along that path, walking with steady, purposeful tread, a man's tall figure loomed. Rafe! It was Rafe! In agony, I stumbled after him. My dream blew like mist from across my vision. I was back in a country lane with Rafe and Jonquil under the full moon's menace, the moon that would presently light Count Dewle from hell. "Here's our field path." Jonquil turned aside to an old stile of flat stones laid with gaps between to keep the cattle from crossing. We followed her, cut across a field to another stile and across it to the desolate, overgrown, rocky bit of wasteland that was our objective. In another minute Jonquil stopped and pointed. There it is." The white, merciless moon showed up every grass blade and flower and stone of the hummock before us. Nature had flung a poisonous pall over the dead, and even the moon's glare could not blanch the blotched evil of henbane, viper's bugloss and deadly nightshade, or the scarlet-spotted fungus on Count Dewle's grave. A cracked and sunken headstone leaned awry at the head of it. The worn lettering showed only a few words of whatever inscription had been cut 200 years ago. Count Dewle died 1738, a warning to all who read. Rafe looked at his watch, glanced up at the moon as it climbed to its fateful meridian. He doffed his armour once more. With mocking, brilliant smile, he looked down on the horrible grave and airily kissed his hand. "Rafe!" Jonquil's brows went up in anxiety. "You must be serious. Darling, I'm sure the BG wouldn't like it. Think what a gay old dog he was in his time. Think how much he must have enjoyed himself to have tried for 2 centuries to get back again. Must make his little trip enjoyable, you know. About time I got to the front door to meet him. I suppose it's no use arguing any more. You won't go home?" "For the 100th time, no, dearest. You might take my rose-red emerald and run off with some other pretty lady." She was looking up into his face, and even to my jaundiced eyes was a sight to stir the blood of any man. For a second, Rafe's devil-may-care mask dropped. His dark, burning eyes and drawn features showed such anguish that I started forward with a cry. This was my dream. His tall figure, so dear, so obstinate, so tragic, moving steadily onward to the edge of an abyss. At once he recovered himself. Behind the brilliant smile he turned to me. I read entreaty. He wanted me to take Jonquil away. He was in terror of what she would see and hear, in terror that she might be endangered too. But I knew also, and it was the only poor comfort I had left, that he wanted me, needed me, as he and I always needed each other in a tight corner. No one on earth, nor from hell, should move me from that graveside, and I confess I was glad that Jonquil should be there also. I wanted to spare her nothing. I hoped if Rafe did not survive that she too would be destroyed. I don't know how much of my thoughts he read, but in any case she wouldn't have left with me. He turned away, opened the metal casket, lifted out of it the withered, pulsing heart, and set it down at the head of the grave under the deeply sunken headstone. My fascinated gaze was held by the horrible little thing. I saw it throb and quiver to the beat, beat, beat of whatever infernal power quickened life in it. I saw its dark, withered walls gleam in the moonlight like tarnished copper. At the other end of the grave, Rafe uprooted a clump of spotted henbane, set down a small black bowl, and poured oil into it. Jonquil's small hands clasped in excitement. She watched with dancing eyes, her curls ruffled about her eager, flower-like face. Rafe glanced at his watch again, smiled once more at Jonquil. He didn't look toward me. I was thankful for it. "Now, for my old BG, stand back there." He waved an imperious hand. "Make way for the Count Dewle. Make way." He took from his pocket the crackling parchment on which the conjuration was written, its black lettering very plain in the moonlight. Ran his eye over it for the last time, although I was certain every word of it was stamped deep in his memory. His voice rang out, as I'd heard it ring on the playing fields when we were boys together. "For your sightless eyes, this flame." He stooped to set alight the oil in the black bowl. "For your fleshless bones, this earth." He scattered dry, dark soil from the basket. "For your withered heart, this blood." He knelt, held out his left hand and slashed it with a knife until blood dripped upon the heart. Then he got swiftly to his feet. His loud voice challenged the dead. "Wake from your sleep, Count Dewle. Rise from your grave, Count Dewle. Return from the dead, Count Dewle. Give me wealth, wealth for my boon." My body was turned to ice, my feet rooted to the ground, my whole being concentrated on Rafe's tall, rigid figure, standing at the graveside. "At the mouth of hell." His last word echoed and reverberated like an organ note. Louder, louder it swelled and boomed until the quiet night hummed and quivered, and the poisonous grave weeds slowly withered, blackened, lay in dust, until the earth beneath them cracked widely open, and the burning oil shot up into a red, roaring fire that was cold as wind off an ice field and seemed to lick the stars. It froze the tears on my cheek. It chilled even the unbearable anguish in my heart. The heart, in the red name's brilliance, shone, incandescent, fiercely alive, then vanished. In that moment the flame sank to earth again. The noise of its burning ceased. Silence far more ominous fell, while overhead The great moon looked down in passionless survey. The grave yawned widely open. From its void rose a wisp of dark smoke that turned and wreathed and twisted and coiled in ever denser volume as it swelled and blew and eddied to and fro above the gaping grave, blind, purposeless, uncertain. Then a nucleus formed in the vaporous evil, a dull purplish red, heart-shaped glowing core, about which the dark mist swiftly formed and reformed to a tall, swaying pillar, an imperceptibly growing outline, a recognizable human body whose white face of damnation stared into Rafe's, whose awful, rotted hands reached out to touch, to hold, to bind him fast. And now I could not distinguish Rafe from the smothering infernal thing itself. It swirled about him. It covered head and hands and feet from sight. When he moved within the enveloping darkness. When his face turned to me, I saw only the dreadful, livid face of the dead. Still, I was frozen there, unable to speak, to move, to do more than see and hear the thing that now moved forward, with fixed, pale, staring eyes and loose, dark lips that mouthed and laughed and whispered as it came. I could not turn to look at Jonquil. I felt her arms about me clutching. I felt her warm, soft body pressed to mine, her face against my cold and empty heart. I heard her long shrieks echoing above the thin, dry whisper of the thing that steadily advanced nearer and nearer. It halted beside us. Now I could see Rafe's tortured eyes, his face and form behind the clouded horror that enfolded him. He was shut up inside it like a chrysalis in a dark cocoon. He was Count Dewle. Count Dewle was Rafe. Next moment, Jonquil was plucked from my side. Her body was flung down on the dew-wet earth. Her curls gleamed as two hands met about her throat, choking a last thin cry. The thing that killed her rose and moved back to the grave. Now I could see Rafe more distinctly beneath the wavering cloud of evil. His dreadful garment grew thin and patchy, drifted from him, lost density and outline as it hovered over the open grave. And the grave's darkness sucked it down, out of sight, back to the hell from which it had come. The yawning hole closed up. The ugly weeds grew rank again upon the hummock. A sunken headstone leaned awry at its end. In the same moment I was released, and I ran, stumbling over the long grass to where Rafe lay huddled. A month later, Rafe was not dead, but he would have died. He would have died if that devil hadn't barred his way out. By some infernal miracle, and after lying unconscious for a week, Rafe woke to full possession of his faculties. No memory was spared him of that fatal resurrection or of Jonquil's unthinkable end. He lives to remember it hour after hour, day after day, week after week. For another 2 months his torture will endure. Then he will be hanged. That much is certain. He confessed to the murder of his wife and stands trial next week. He'll plead guilty, and there'll be practically no defence. Neither he nor I mean to confess a word of the actual truth. It would condemn him to years and years of life as a criminal maniac, remembering. A murderer and a millionaire. Oh, yes, Count Dewle kept his promise. A will turned up when the Chief Inspector of Police was going through Rafe's papers in the library. The thing toppled off a bookcase at the inspector's feet. It stated that the Count had left a legacy buried in the cellars of Braun Fell. The police dug it up. Emeralds, an astounding collection which was photographed and written up in every rag in the country. The finest gem was a great rose-red emerald, cut square and set with diamonds as a pendant. I burned the book and the conjuration. I threw the metal box into Lake Derwentwater, but I couldn't find the heart. I went over every inch of the grave and all round it. Rafe takes this as a sign Count Dewle's power is expended. I'm thankful that he doesn't understand. I know that Dewle will return somehow, somewhere. Jonquil's death means life for him. Her will to live is added to his own. When Rafe dies, he will look for her and never find her. Never. She is one with the Count now, part of his thought, his will, his enduring evil. Whether I can learn his secret, learn enough to meet him and destroy him, I don't yet know. When I am left alone, it will be all that remains worth doing in a world of fear and shadows. If you like that story, consider supporting me as a patron. That way you help me make more stories for you and get access to a patrons-only library of stories. Lots more hours for you to listen to.
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret of the dead come back?
So that was The Withered Heart by G.G. Pendarves. Now, that was a pen name actually, and I'll tell you the author's true name in a second. I may have actually put it up in some of the teasers and whatever like that, but I'm going to tell you how I got the story. So on Monday, I was in Grasmere. I was walking past Sam Reed's bookshop. Now, Sam Reed's bookshop doesn't open till 10 a.m, and I was there slightly earlier than that. But I then went back because I'd seen in the window this British Library hardback edition of called The Dead of Summer, Strange Tales of May Eve and Midsummer, edited by Johnny Mains. And the British Library, as you know, has been putting out a whole series of books from their own collections, because it's the central library. And it always was, if you published a book in the UK, you had to send a copy to the British Library, so they had a copy. And I think that went for magazines as well. So in their enormous archive, they presumably have every single ghost story, pulp story, whatever. They do detective stories, and they decided some years ago, you probably know this, to start publishing a series. And they've done a whole bunch of them. And they're really good value as well. I don't know whether they're subsidised, but I think this was £13 for a hardback book, and I would imagine if it hadn't been the British Library done it, it would have been 20 odd quid. Anyway, so I'm always, the ghost story time is, we start coming into October, and it takes us right through to January, February, and then we kind of get out of it. And we've been blessed really with about 6 to 8 weeks of glorious weather, which is massively unusual. I don't think we've had a stretch of good weather like this for years, probably since about 2018, I think. And then it's rare, but I'm enjoying it. It hasn't rained much. It's due to rain next week, and then who knows, it may rain all summer. But anyway, I'm in a summer mood. I'm wearing my shorts. I've got my Avebury cap on. I've got in Avebury, there's Avebury is the village surrounded by the stone circles in Wiltshire, and obviously being me and Sheila, we love it. And there's kind of hippie shops there, crystal shops, and they sold this peak cap. It's when we walked the ridge where we started at Avebury and walked over to Tring. Anyway, so summer, that's got nothing to do with her. So let me tell you about, and this story is in there. Now, I think potentially that they're scraping the barrel a little bit with the volumes of stories. They're going through them. And listen, I know some people would absolutely love this story, and I thought it was a fun story, but I'm not sure it's a great story. Sorry. I mean, she was a massively prolific writer and made a living by selling stories like this, but it's full of tropes. Is there anything deeper to say about it? Well, maybe you don't care, but let's talk about her first. So G.G. Pendarves was in fact Gladys Gordon Trenery. Now, when I start looking into her, the preface to it, the story by Johnny Mains, the editor in The Dead of Summer, says he found out she was conflated with another woman called Mary Lamb, and it was presumed that was a pseudonym of Gladys Gordon Trenery, just as G.G. Pendarves is. And he kind of untangled them, even though in other anthologies they are put together as the same person, but they're not. Now, when you start looking, he admits there's not much is known about her. So I had to go on the internet and kind of scoop through everything that is known about her, and I can bring you something. But there's loads of mistakes. The sources again and again say she is Mary Lamb, but she isn't. And they talk about her as being Cornish. And I'm guessing perhaps the pseudonym Pendarves sounds a bit Cornish. Her own surname, Trenery, could actually be a Cornish name. But she was born in West Derby in Lancashire, now part of Liverpool, in 1885. How do I know this? Because I was so intrigued by the lady. I thought, and I'm like this, I want to know. So I went on my Ancestry Co UK, and I searched for her. Now, I'm going to say, at different times in my life, I've put a lot of work into my family tree. And I haven't for a while, but I maintain it. And I kind of grumble a bit because Ancestry charge me £3.50 a month just to keep my data. So they're like, they're a bit like the mafia. Unless you pay us this, we're going to delete all your work. Potentially, there may be a way of downloading it all, so it's all mine, and I should look into that, but I just pay the £3.50. So I went on Ancestry, and I put in, it's a fairly unusual name, and I knew the date of birth, 1885, and I found her birth details on Ancestry, Gladys Gordon Trenery, but it would have been interesting to look at the birth certificate, because that would have given you the occupation of her father and mother, and a bit more information about the family, but it was going to charge me. Then it said, do you want to upgrade to Worldwide Explorer for $35 a month? I'm going, no, I just want to actually see this. So I didn't. I'm too mean. I didn't go into that. But there we are. I got a date of birth, West Derby, in January 1885. So she's not Cornish. She's technically Lancastrian. I'm not sure she'll be a Scouser. We don't know how she spoke, but she might have been very well-spoken. And can you be a well-spoken Scouser? Interesting question. I love the Liverpool accent, actually. I won't do one now. So Gladys Gordon Trenery, or Trainery. There is some guy from Liverpool called that, isn't there? Was he? No, is he from Egremont? And is he one of the musicians from It Bites? I'm going to have to stop and look. No, that was Francis Dunnery from Egremont. So the other thing to say about this story is that it's set in my own neck of the woods. It's set in Cumbria, so stop at Shap, and then she drives to Keswick down loops of road. I'm not sure what the road was like then. Which way would you have come? Through the lakes, probably. But I'm not sure you can see, when you're driving into Borrowdale, as she talks about, you can see Helvellyn. I'm not sure you can, actually. I think the Derwent Fells are in the way. But fair enough. We'll let her off with that. So, there she is, Gladys Gordon. What else do we know about her? When she was 22, she got a pass certificate from the Royal Academy of Music and the Royal College of Music in piano and became a music teacher. She lived in Birkenhead when she was young. She began a writing career in the pulp magazine, world first publishing as G.G. Pendarves. Very interesting. I wonder where she got that pseudonym from. G.G., obviously Gladys Gordon, but Pendarves, I don't know. So her first story, published in 1923, really interesting, was The Kabbalist with a K. So she has got an interest in the occult, even, and I mean a proper occult, not just ghost stories, but kind of magic and necromancy. So Hutchinson's mystery story, and she went on to become a prolific contributor to Weird Tales. Now, when I was researching, I looked at the covers of Weird Tales. She actually gets the cover story on a couple of them. Various of her stories were the top Weird Tales story. She got the top billing for that. So she's obviously well known for her occult and ghost stories. Farnsworth Wright revealed G.G. Pendarves was Trenery's pseudonym in the December 1938 obituary. So she died. There was no collection of her stories published until after she died. And so this story here, The Withered Heart, I don't think... It maybe did appear in Weird Tales, but it came out in the anthology. So it was published in 1938, and she died in 1938. So she was either writing it on her deathbed, or more likely it was. My mother was born in March 1938, so they shared the earth for a little while, but I didn't. I came a bit later. Whether that's, I don't know, what's the point of me saying that anyway? So she was then Richard Dolby, who did fantastic work anthologizing these lesser known ghost story writers. He did a story of hers in the Virago book of stories, 1987, but he thought that Marjorie E. Lamb, no, the return was Marjorie E. Lamb's. I'm getting confused as well. And he said it was Trenery's, but it wasn't. Trenery also wrote a story called The Return, but she wrote her story in 1927, so the two things got mixed up. Anyway, so there isn't a ton known about her. She seems to have lived a reasonably normal life, born in Liverpool, died in the Wirral, worked as initially as a music teacher, but then supported herself by writing pulp fiction. Why not? Let's look at this story. So remember, imagine you don't know that this is a woman called Gladys Trenery and G.G. Pendarves, and you would perhaps assume that it was a bloke, that it was a man. And then you'd think, this is what I thought. I mean, I knew it was a woman, but even though I suspended my knowledge, and I thought, this John, he's very close to Rafe, isn't he? They have this bromance, I think you'd call it. And they were at school together, and like nunneries or convents, where sexuality and gender have become massively controversial issues, haven't they? But all I was going to say quite innocently was, if you put a lot of young people together of the same sex, their romantic urges have got to go somewhere, and it may turn out that they are actually gay, or in later life, or they have a brief fling or a crush, on somebody of the same sex, and that doesn't pervade the rest of their lives. But so it is reputedly common that young men in single-sex private schools, public schools as they're known, can develop romantic relationships. And you see how I'm trying to avoid the landmines here. And fair enough. And so this is what I thought. And he appears to be massively jealous of Jonquil. He doesn't like her from the outset. And it's written in a way that Jonquil, she's ambiguous in that, does the author, not John doesn't like her at all. Rafe is devoted to her, isn't he? He'd do anything for her. And but does the author like her? And so the first reading would be that they are love rivals. And I think you don't have to dig too deep. They are right. It even says it as much, isn't it? It would come between this friendship of Rafe and John and clearly Rafe's besottedness with Jonquil. So that is how I would have read it at first. I think that was an interesting spin on it, and that leads us into I'm actually really interested in queer theory as I kind of look at. I'm not trained in it or anything like that, but I've been reading up on it. I'm always interested in new ways of looking at the world. My latest thing this week was I was reading into John Bowlby's. Of course, I've come across Bowlby before, attachment theory and the internal working models, and I think that's really interesting. And I always think it's really interesting to look at how the lenses you can see things through. So I thought this is a really interesting story to look at through queer theory, and I thought I would perhaps, and then there will be people spitting the coffee out at this, but whatever I say, people are going to spit out the coffee because I'm going to say something else that is devastating and will cause unsubscriptions. But there we are, and it is the potential of a really beautiful woman. Really beautiful women are like, they have immense power, and they're like atomic bombs in lots of ways, because usually they're very aware of their power, and their power, it causes people around them, like a black hole, to react to them. Men become foolish and stupid, and they will ruin themselves like moths to a flame, heterosexual men, moths to a flame for a beautiful woman. They make complete fools of themselves very often. And women, you know, I speak as just an ordinary bloke, and ordinary lasses will have also a different, they know that particularly shockingly beautiful women are... they're not like other people, and they're aware of their power, and they are drawn by this. And often, and this is what I'm going to say, is I have observed, listen, I've been a nurse, I've worked mainly with women. In my family, 2 daughters, a very, I'm going to say dominant, but certainly important mother figure, very important grandmother figure. So, you know, the feminine has been very present in my life. Sheila is a very strong character. So I'm used to spending time and observing women, and I've seen how they react. I mean, the girls, they have a cousin who was scouted as a model. Also, her dad, their uncle, is really wealthy, and she's and she got a first-class degree in engineering. Fair play to her. So she is kind of winning, isn't she? And the girl's attitude to her, my girls are beautiful, lovely girls, but you know, she is exceptionally attractive. And the other thing, I'm not going to say her name, I worked with a young nurse who was, and we were on a team, and I was much older than her, and we had a kind of, honestly, a paternal relationship. I was very protective towards her, because she was a bit older than my daughters, but, you know, she was like another daughter to me, really. And all the blokes, I had to... She was quite capable of fighting them off, but it was annoying. For me, all these doctors, porters, male ward clerks, kind of just buzzing around her all the time. It was really annoying. Anyway, I have strayed, but I think it's worth saying. And if we don't say these things, this is just my opinion, these are my observations, you may strongly object to them, but, you know, fair enough, this is what I think. And so that beautiful women, exceptionally beautiful, I'm not just talking about, you know, pretty girls, I'm talking about beautiful, and I think there is a difference. And there are not many of them, and they exert this black hole effect on both males and females. And it seemed to me that Jonquil was this. We haven't even got into queer theory yet. So, other themes in this story, of course, is the classic trope of the perils of forbidden knowledge. When I was saying that I wasn't, I began saying I thought there was, you know, potentially scraping the barrel. I think it's a fun story, but certain things didn't ring true. I don't mean not being able to see Helvellyn from Borrowdale. I mean, it depends on, if you're on the west side of Borrowdale, you probably can, but the road runs on the east side. And as I said, the Derwent Fells are in the way. By the by. So, I've lost my thread there. The thing about it would... So, okay, they find this box and it's a beating heart. It's been beating for 200 years. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then I'm like, really? Is this a comedy? And also the comic parts when he's... which I thought were well done, actually. When John is talking to his gardener, Joe. And I thought that was kind of, you know, the quippery there was good. So there we have the themes... The perils of forbidden knowledge. We talked about that a lot recently, that trope, the Eldritch Tome trope. It's a MacGuffin, but here's an Eldritch Tome in this as well. And also greed and its destructive power. Now, this, of course, isn't just a theme in horror stories or supernatural stories. It's pervasive throughout literature, not even just Western literature. The greedy will be punished. That's, you know, so it's a moral story. We're admonished not to be greedy, and particularly not to use the occult. This is related to what I was saying in the previous episode about, you know, the powers of God are God's, not ours, and the hubris of us is going to be punished. Icarus flying too close to the sun, you know, Prometheus stealing fire. But, you know, this is a consistent thing, particularly in Gothic literature. The greedy are punished. Now, so we talked about the intensity of the friendship and Jonquil as an intrusion. And, yeah, he has this dream whereby he is the saviour of Well, he isn't. Is he? Is he? Sort of his friend Rafe. Let's get into a deeper discussion about identity, because I think this story it teases with it. So first of all, let's take 1914, and the British are going to war, and it is this is as a lead up to this story. It's not this story, and it. So it was the identity then, the group identity, because we're going to be talking about identities in a minute when we come back to queer theory, is about we are all English, let's say. Not even Scots, or the Scots are the Scots, the Welsh are the Welsh, but the English are the English, and both the Baron and the Duke and the Earl, they're English, and the labourer and the vagrant are English, and we are all called together to go and die for England or kill for England. I'm not saying any of that's right. I'm just saying that was a group identity. I'm an Englishman. I'm not, I'm just talking like that. And the Duke also says that. And so the identity is English. And so this idea of class, which is another way of breaking up groups, is secondary to that. And you see what I'm saying? So the group identity in that case was, and this was taken as a reality. This was taken as, this is a fact. It's a given fact. There is a one group, and there are Americans, and Spaniards and all sorts of stuff. But in this case, I'm using this example. You know what I mean. And this is a truth given by God or given by some authority, that we are, subjects of the king, and we have a duty, etc., etc., etc. And this is like a tribal thing, really going back to the Medes and the Persians, or even further back than them. The Etruscans or whatever. So that is one identity. Now, Marx comes along in the 19th century, and he says famously, workers of the world unite. So what he's saying is, you don't cut it. It's not about nations. It's not about Germans or French people or Irish people. It's about class. So the working class person in Austria has more in common with the working class person in Venezuela than they do with the Duke of Austria. Yeah, so we're cutting the cake a different way. We're not cutting it vertically, we're cutting it horizontally, and so you can belong. So this is another identity, and so Marx introduces this idea of classes and goes further to say that one of these groups, these classes as he called them, is unfairly exploiting the other, and it's jolly well about time that other group stood up for their rights against their oppressor. So this is a really key understanding of groups being pitted against each other, and power imbalance, and the righteousness of the disempowered, as Marx would say, to rise up and get their slice of the cake. Yeah, this is really important to understand that. Right, that is a very important component of queer theory. And as we go into the 21st century, the groups now, we have absolute ethnic, national groups, really. So Americans are different ethnicities, but they're all American is a really good example. So that still exists. Certain people, and it's much less fashionable, we'll talk about class identity. So, the working class of the world are one group against the ruling class of the world. That's another. It's less common. But we have race as well. So say I'm Korean. My group is Koreans wherever Koreans are, and we are, and if we feel as, I'm poor old Koreans, but, say the Koreans feel that they've been, and they do, exploited, say, by the Japanese, let's say, then they are a group. Now, that, of course, is an ethnic group, so maybe not a great example. But certainly, say I'm a person of colour. I'm not. And that is such a wide, and that's a grouping of everybody who has darker skin. So if you're from Turkey or Venezuela or Nigeria, you're actually all the same, which seems implausible to me, to be honest. But I know this is certainly a group identity that's put forward. And so we have that, and the same argument is that this group has been marginalised, persecuted by lighter-skinned people, so therefore you get this group warfare, identity conflict like that. Now, the other identity, of course, as we're very familiar with this century, is two things: sexual choice, right, i.e. who am I sexually attracted to, and sexual identification. What am I? Am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I neither of those things, So these groups exist as well. And then if you feed that into this Marxist basis, it's not Marxist, but Marx, fair play to him, gives this idea of warring groups, of underprivileged groups fighting for their rights. You see how this partially creates if we use queer theory as a way of understanding literary texts, it informs our view. We're going to be going at a text and we're going to be looking for groups. We're not interested in their race, but we might be. Intersectionality puts everything together. But let's say we're not. Let's say we're pure. And we're not interested in, all we're interested in is their gender and their sexual preference, right? From a queer lens, right? The other really important component of queer theory comes from another philosophical tradition, which is postmodernism. So postmodernism, which emerges in the mid to late 20th century. So it's characterized by a skepticism towards grand narratives, fixed meanings and essential truths. So if I go back to my example of the First World War, this idea that we, as a nation of Englishmen, and English women should support us as well, we're all English, that's our group, that's the truth. Postmodernism goes, really? Really? And it says that reality is not a stable objective structure, but a product of discourse shaped by language, power and culture. So the power thing is fed into it by Marxism, I think. I think that's its inheritance. But, culture, language, power and culture. And we're looking at people like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Jean-François Lyotard, and heavy French presence there. And so they said truth is not discovered. It's not an objective reality. This is what they say. It's made. It's constructed and it's contingent. So truth does not... it's not true forever for all time. It's just, So queer theory, this is really important to queer theory, I think. And to me, the group warfare thing isn't as interesting to me, just to me, I'm being very postmodern, as this really questioning truth. Of course, the irony about postmodernism, it just says nothing is true except our theory that nothing's true. Oh, yeah, so that's true. Yeah, that's amusing. So if we look at identity, and we're talking about sexual preference and sexual identity, I suppose. So it says, and queer theory central to it is the idea that the categories of man, woman, heterosexual and homosexual are not true, but as postmodernists would say, are culturally determined. They're not biological, they're culturally repeated fictions. So it is a child of postmodernism, so it takes its tools, deconstruction, critique of norms and attention to marginalised voices, which is, that is the Marxist side of it, I think. It seeks not simply to reverse power hierarchies, Marxism, but to dissolve the structures that make those hierarchies seem necessary and natural. So there's two things going on. There's a warfare thing, which is to destroy, and the other is to critique. But me being me, I'm being very postmodern about it. I'm situated where I am because of who I am, where I brought up. So, clearly, mostly important to me or interesting to me is this deconstruction, this chaos. Just let's, you think that's true? Is it true? And let's just destabilize that a little bit. Okay. So, we're going to mention Judith Butler's concept of performativity, central to understanding how queer theory can be applied to this story. So performativity refers not to acting in a superficial sense, but the repeated social practices that constitute gender and sexuality. So remember, the fundamental belief is that these things about it is actually really interesting, because what it's suggesting there is that my choice of being attracted to men or women is just that. It's a performance. So I could perform being attracted to men, or I could perform being attracted to women, and it's not actually fundamental. Now, I would say there is another movement. Again, it's not me speaking from my lived experience, so take it with a pinch of salt. But most gay men that I know, gay women that I know, do not see it as a choice or a performance. It is who they are. So again, that would be slightly undermining to this idea. But certainly sexual identity. So sexual predilections, persuasion, choice, who I fancy, basically, seems to me to be much more fixed than the idea of who I am. So anyway, performativity, let's just swallow that. Now let's look at this story. Finally, let's get to this story. So what we say about, if we look at this Jonquil, and I've already talked about her from a different lens, her immense power as a beautiful woman, but she is the one. So at this particular time, I thought it was very interesting. He calls her my child, doesn't he? And he pats her on the head and gets her to sit back, and so we have this almost paternal relationship where he would do anything for her. He clearly loves her. He would do anything for her to keep her happy, but he treats her as if she's not quite capable of doing things, and he's performing the male role, if you like, in that way. But she is a bit smarter, and you may argue this is what always happens and always has happened, that she exerts her power not directly, but through persuasion and through charm and through using a coquettishness. And you may say this is not fair, and you may say this is wrong, but that's how but she gets what she wants ultimately. So Machiavelli would probably have something to say about that. What's his name? The Art of War, Sun Tzu. I'm not sure they did say anything about this, but the idea is, if it works, do it. You take the path that gets you to what you want. We're talking about power again, aren't we? But so she is this. She's passively cultural, but she is actually powerful. And so we might say she destabilizes patriarchal certainties. We might say that. That's in my notes. She's the one who's not frightened. She needs the wealth. She has come to Rafe from a rich guy, and she's inherited this falling down house that needs a lot of money spent on it. And she's the one who's come up with the idea. What we're going to do is we're going to contact your long dead ancestor. And just to jump at the trope of a Hungarian count, okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, she may have been writing this. I give them what they want. They like Hungarian counts. Have a Hungarian count, So and he's like, I'm not too sure. And John is like, oh no, and she's like, yeah, come on. Now, there we go. There's another figure worth including is Barbara Creed's theory of the monstrous feminine. And this is related to what I was saying. You may even have heard it in my voice, a figure who embodies male anxieties about female agency, sexuality and power. I've been talking about that. Jonquil becomes a modern Eve. Get Eve, Garden of Eden, whose desire for knowledge and wealth leads to ruin. She is Eve, isn't she? But in the Genesis story, Eve is punished and Adam is punished, and they both, I suppose, in this story they both are. But it seems to me that Jonquil is primarily punished. But fair enough, they both. Being fair, Rafe gets hanged. So yeah, okay, they're both punished for this seeking out of knowledge. And as I said, we talked about the seeking out of knowledge in different podcast episodes. But it is her, and I'm not sure it's a totally selfish. We may portray it as she wants an emerald. Fair enough. That's a nice little touch that they find, and it was the emerald that she had envisaged, manifested, and so. But sometimes my brain runs out of power. So yeah, her fate is a cautionary punishment. in horror, this is my note here. I get ChatGPT, I do my notes and I say, write this up so I can read it out in a nice way. Because otherwise mine's got crossing out and all sorts. And it says, in horror, as in patriarchy, the price of female desire is death. Oof, powerful. So let's talk about transgression in queer theory. So transgression is a really important concept in queer theory, yeah? And it is about these rules that you think are true. We're going to transgress them, and we're going to why are we going to do this? Well, for various reasons, but one intellectually very interesting reason is this postmodernist project to say these rules that you hold so dear as being absolute truths, they're not, and we're going to show you. And so in stories, this is very, very interesting. Now, let's just have a look, see what else I've got. And we talked about the queer subtext of John and Rafe's relationship, an intense emotional bond, unspoken yet vividly rendered. So she shows this. But I think what's really interesting is that she is a woman writing this story. And I don't know what I think about that, really. Is she for Jonquil? Is she against Jonquil? Is she John? And as I don't know what her sexual preferences were, but yeah, so I can't say. Yes, indeed. So there's a ton of stuff to say here, and I think I've been wanting to look at queer theory for a long time because I love this idea of transgression. I love this idea of taking a truth and going, is it though? And demonstrating that in a story, and it struck me that this Jonquil, the character of Jonquil, her power, really, this black hole thing I've been talking, must have kind of struck an unconscious chord with me. Anyway, talk to my therapist about that. But also this very intense relationship between the two men. I thought, this is a good one to talk about this. But I think it's really interesting, and I like tracing back the roots of these thoughts, because in queer theory, in postmodernism is its own demise, because basically postmodernism is saying nothing is true. If you follow that through, it's not true either, and so it must dissolve. There's a fantastic thing come out now called transcendent modernism. Let me find out. I've got a note on it. I'll come right back to you. Yeah, transmodernism. I made some notes on this at the time. So this idea of transmodernism that follows postmodernism, and it was formed by, as I'm looking on that, Argentinian-Mexican philosopher Enrique Dussel, and it is turning away and puts a lot of emphasis on spirituality and transpersonal psychology. Think of Ken Wilber and people like that. So I'm not going to talk about that now, but I like that. So yeah, there we are. It's always good to think about these things. Absolutely. And I, as usual, may have been a little bit incoherent, but let me know what you think.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother?